Hey everyone, I've got another interview for you, this time not from quite as long ago as interview number 2. This one is with Mel, who is a principal product manager at Twitch. And we talked about quite a lot. It was a really interesting conversation. Mel and I only met through being in each other's streams online. So it was great to be able to pick her brain on what's been going on and how she feels about Twitch and the industry. So I hope you'll enjoy the video and thanks for watching. Well, thank you for joining me. You just said that your intro changed a little bit. Do you want to do your intro for everyone so that we're all on the same page?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So hi, I'm Mel. I go by Juicebox Hero on Twitch. I've been in tech for 15 years. I've been working at Twitch for 7.5 years, which is like, I'm like a serial monogamist when it comes to companies. Like previously to that, I was at Pandora, the music app company, for 5.5 years. So I've really only had like 2 kind of big tech jobs, and
Well,
I stay forever.
was
Um,
Google in the mix for that?
yeah, so Google was like uh my first big girl job, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna go to law school, so I took like a year off between graduating NYU pre-law and studying for the LSATs, and then I wanted to not live with my parents, so I got a job, and then that job turned into an offer from Google, and then 15 years has passed, and I never went to law school. So.
Well, okay, I'm sorry. I said to do your intro, so let me have you finish your intro, but I'm
Oh
dying
yeah,
to
yeah,
find out
yeah.
more. So yeah.
Yeah, so I've been at Twitch for 7.5 years. I've fulfilled many different product roles. I was originally brought on to bring what we call server-side ad insertion technology
Mm-hmm.
to Twitch, which essentially is like ad block friendly ads on Twitch.
Yeah.
And after I brought that to market, I founded a team called the Ad Measurement Team, and then I was on that team for a couple of years. And then I founded the Twitch Privacy Team, and then I got to build that team up from scratch, which was really cool. And then since the last 2 rifts, I've sort of increased my scope dramatically. So now I am in charge of identity, privacy, uh, users, and data platform. So where there
Okay.
was once like 4 or 5 product managers, there is me.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say it sounds like you're a real go-getter because what started as let's go to law school turned into let's make some money, which turned into let's found 4 different teams and really just to change the
Well,
landscape there.
I don't know if go-getter is the term for it. It's more like the last person standing kind of situation.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like a lot of tech companies are going through this where like Twitter fired like 75% of their company or whatever, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, like twitter.com still loads. So I think a lot of other companies are testing out like how much they can cut back
I
while still
do
having like a relatively functional product.
I do
So
see that happening, but I don't feel like this started 7.5 years ago when you were starting at Twitch. And you did successfully take the server side ad insertion to completion and then started founding teams, which I'm guessing happened maybe 5 years ago or so. So,
yeah,
yeah. So I think
I
you're
guess
not
this
giving
is the
yourself enough
point.
credit. I think you are a go-getter, but maybe also you're the last person standing. Do you feel like you said there were 4 or 5 product managers where now there's just you? Has there been that pruning down?
Yeah, there has been. I mean, I think it's relatively public. I think it has to be in California. You have to sort of just say how many people you're laying off.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've seen about a 50% reduction on our end. And I have like a lot of friends in the industry, and it sounds like that seems to be true of many companies,
Yeah.
especially the kind of weird mid-size subsidiary companies, um, like Twitch. Like we essentially have like a granddaddy company that
Y-
we have to report into.
Yep.
Um, and it's hard because like the math is a little fuzzy when you get to these kind of like really big corporations where you have theoretically infinite runway, but no one's going to give you infinite runway, really.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think just in the past few years, there's been a bit of a pruning for like these mid-sized subsidiary companies that used to kind of theoretically have infinite runway, but don't anymore.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, you've been there now for long enough. I think the Amazon acquisition was in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, which would have been a little before your time there. But you've probably still seen a cultural shift from when that was news to now when it is no longer news. Have you seen that happen?
I'm so sorry. I have alerts set up and someone followed me and
Can I shout them out?
it was so loud. I was shocked. I think I have to mute alerts real quick.
Okay,
But
okay, yeah.
can you repeat that last bit of the
Yeah,
question?
sure, sure, definitely. Um, I was saying that Amazon acquired Twitch, I think back in 2014. Have you seen a
Yeah.
cultural shift from when that was still recent news to now?
Yeah. There's like a lot of good and a lot of bad, I think, when sort of any of these like really big acquisitions. Um, One thing I really like about Amazon culture that Twitch has done a really good job of adopting is Amazon tends to be like very document heavy and very like document driven culture. So when I first joined, there was like not a lot of due diligence around like artifacts
Hmm.
and like creating artifacts. And I think Amazon really took their model and then applied it to Twitch. And it's kind of weird in some ways. Like whenever we go into a meeting, there's always this weird 10 to 15-minute silence where everyone sits and reads the document together.
Mm,
It's less weird on in like the post-pandemic world when everyone just turns their camera off. But it was definitely weird in person when there'd be like 20 or 30 people like in a room reading like printed out documents and like scribbling on them and like it was kind of cool, but actually I at first thought that was really weird, but it turns out it's like I think one of probably the most effective ways to run meetings now because then like everyone has they're starting from like the same place of information.
yeah.
Like everyone has read what we're going to discuss and then has had time to like form an opinion. And then like you don't have to like carve out time ahead of a meeting to get all the context for the meeting.
Well,
And then
and
it forces
I'm sorry.
meeting create oh sorry. It forces meeting creators to have like a lot of structure and diligence to the way that they run their meetings. Like if they don't give you all the context, the meeting is going to be terrible.
Yeah.
So it makes everyone, I think, better writers and everyone better organizers. And I've really enjoyed that piece probably the most. Um, the the kind of weird piece is like the very, very corporate goal setting.
Hmm.
Um, and it's not, I mean, like it's great to have goals and it's great to revise those goals. But the way that Amazon structures their goal setting, you essentially do goal setting, and then by the time you're done, it's time to start goal setting again.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So there's kind of like you can't like throw yourself completely into it because you also have to deliver on the goals. So it just ends up being like this forever process, um, which is weird because I almost feel like no one's following up to make sure that you achieve those goals as much as they're making sure that you set your next goals.
Yeah, it always makes you wonder what level of the company actually needs this information. Is it the top brass who's asking for it? Is there someone who's following up? And now that you've seen that pruning of the workforce and that you're acting as many different PMs at once, I feel like the accountability is probably mostly on you at this point. So if it helps you, great. If it doesn't help you, it sounds like yeah, it's just pressure. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say about the meeting prep. I think it's hard when a company acquires another one to get the same cultures. There's a diffusion in both directions. And it's nice what you mentioned about the organization. What I've heard about Amazon is that they have like a 6-page document requirement. Is that the same thing at Twitch? Is there a
Oh yeah.
that is?
There's a whole thing. That's the one pager or three pager and a six pager.
Yeah.
Those are the things. A one pager is like you want people to listen to your problems.
Hmm.
A three pager is like I think I have a good solution to the problems, and then a six pager is like I have the solution. Listen to me and agree with me.
Yeah.
At least that's my mental model. I'm sure Jeff Bezos is rolling over in his yacht somewhere. I think maybe he had a different vision for it than I did. But yeah, I Twitch sort of follows that model in that like we everyone kind of takes like the same writing classes. It's like
Hmm.
a really interesting system called the working backwards
Yeah.
system. And the idea is like you sit around and you visualize like you're in a world where you're launching your product and you know users are responding to your product. And then you take that end state and then you work backwards to figure out how you got there.
Mm.
Um, and a lot of people will do this exercise, but at Amazon, it's very formalized. Like you have a working backwards document, and then everyone reads it, and they all talk about it, and that's like the first step if you ever want to get anything done. But at Twitch, people will do the exercise and like shove it in the appendix. So that like you're like, oh yeah, I did the exercise, but that's not like the main document I'm presenting to you.
So you see this difference between Amazon and Twitch. Is it because you're on the Amazon side of things every once in a while?
Yeah. So I was originally on the ads team, and I feel like if you had to pick one side of the business that has the most surface area
Hmm.
with Amazon, it's probably the ads team.
Yeah.
It's either the ads team or IVS, which is our interactive video service,
Hmm.
which is basically Twitch is a service on AWS. Those two teams probably have the most surface area with Amazon. So I worked with Amazon a lot, and privacy also has a ton of Amazon implications.
Hmm.
So when I was working on privacy, I was like meeting with a few Amazon teams like weekly, and like I would like fly up to Seattle probably once a quarter when I was working on some of the big projects on privacy. So
Wow. Well, so I want to ask you more about what led you here because you mentioned that really it started with being in about to take the LSATs and then getting the job at Google, getting an offer, and then starting with the server side ad insertion. You worked your way to privacy and ads. Was it asked of you then? I know you said originally last person standing kind of thing, but was it more of an interest on your side or more of a need on the company side or a good marriage of both of those things?
yeah, it's a good question. So how much you know about privacy? Do you?
I almost feel like it doesn't matter because I think you
Yeah,
should share it anyway for the people in the audience.
that
Yeah.
makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Sorry, I feel like this is just a meeting.
No,
Um,
it's fine. Yeah, ignore the viewers and the follow alerts and
so in 2018,
Mhm.
probably the first massive modern privacy law went into effect called
Mhm.
the GDPR, which is the European privacy law that essentially made it. If I had to like zoom out and say like what was the GDPR about, and it stands for the General Protection Data Act or Data Privacy Regulation, um, and Data Protection Regulation. Oh my God, and I think the end goal for the GDPR was prior to 2018, there was like essentially this open market of personal data that existed across all of advertising.
Mhm.
So every time you did anything on the internet that was logged somewhere by these massive data aggregators that would take all of the things you had done and then try and figure out who you are. And then they would sell a way to target you across different platforms in these like neat little things called audience packages.
Mhm.
And by neat, I mean future dystopian terrifying.
Yep.
And this is around prior to 2018 was like the heyday of personal data marketplace being just like unregulated and doing whatever it wanted. And that's where you got like a lot of the weird horror stories from like 2015 to 2017, like Target advertised pregnancy, like pregnancy supplies to a 14-year-old girl whose dad didn't know she was pregnant,
Yeah.
but like they knew she was pregnant. And then there's like a huge like thing where he was like, why are you sending me like, stuff for like prenatal vitamins? And then it turned out that he didn't know his daughter was pregnant. And I think that's just like a fun little horror story of what it looked like at the time. But it was true. There were these like kind of massive data aggregators that were selling audience segments to anyone who was willing to buy it.
Mhm.
And then, with a few cents, any advertiser could find out like how old you were, how much money you made, if you had kids, if you were thinking about buying a car. I think the most future dystopian thing I ever saw was, um, which I don't even know how to feel about this because it feels so weird. They would create like essentially anti-targeting groups to try and like not advertise sensitive topics to people who are going through something hard.
Yeah.
They would have like people who we think have depression. They had like people who had possibly had a miscarriage. I've seen like in these really big audience targeting platforms. And it was very weird and very bad, I think. So I think the EU properly looked at this and said like this is a bad situation. Like we can't just be data brokers. We can't just let this happen without any regulation whatsoever. So then they passed the GDPR. And one of the big cornerstones of the GDPR is that whenever you visit any site, you see a banner.
Mhm.
And the banner says, like, do I have your consent to gather personal information about you based on your behavior on this site and then share it with third parties? And
Yeah.
third parties are usually data aggregators that sell audience segments. And if you say no to that, which should only be 1 or 2 clicks away, then that site can't do that.
Yeah.
And it was the first time ever that I think like a big body of government actually like took a swing at this. And
Mhm.
since then, there's been a lot of more privacy laws that got passed around the world. Like there's 6 or 7 states in the US that now have modern privacy laws. Korea and Brazil have modern privacy laws. And I think India is passing a modern privacy law, as well as Russia. So it's like everyone for the first time ever is like paying attention after 2018. And basically when it happened, every site that operated in Europe like panicked. They're like, how do we like become compliant
Yeah.
without really any precedent for what this law is? And I think a lot of companies chose like these like third parties to like handle their compliance. Like there's a couple of privacy based companies like OneTrust or Evidon that like specifically build like banners that you can just sort of like plug and play in an iframe on your website.
Mhm.
But basically the data um, environment in the Amazon world is so complex and rich, like we couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So in like the nth hour, they decided that we should just build our own. And then a very intense game of hot potato occurred.
Of who gets the role of the product manager for that?
Well, of who was going to handle just the launch of GDPR, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
By the time I got to it, I think I was like the third product manager that it landed on my plate. And if there's one thing that's like always been true about me, and I think it kind of speaks to like why I wanted to go in the law in the first place, is I have like a very strong sense of justice.
Mhm.
And I had been in advertising at Google and at Google/YouTube and Pandora for years and years and years. And I had kind of seen these like open personal data marketplaces for a long
Yeah.
time. And I was like, that's wrong. Like I inherently knew it was wrong. And I was like, it was the first time that someone had been like, here's a possible solution. Like you can be the change you want to see in the world.
Mhm.
So I picked up like the shambles of what the product managers before me had left, and then I brought it to market. And then it became very clear that GDPR wasn't just a banner.
Mhm.
Like as
Yeah.
regulators started enforcing it, as like regulators started putting together investigatory committees to like look at the websites that were implementing privacy law, it became clear that there was like 5 to 10 other services and products that needed to be in place in order to really be compliant with the law. So then at that point, I wrote me and our, I guess he was like an assistant general attorney at
Yeah.
our company, wrote what's called a white paper. Well, I guess you know what a white paper is, but we wrote a white paper that was like, here's our pitch for why I think we need a dedicated privacy team. And then we very happily got like, a pretty generous amount of headcount that became less generous over time to go build the privacy team out. So we did that, and that was like a pretty fun situation.
Yeah, so I want to talk about a couple things here. One, you were lucky enough to live in California where there are good privacy laws. But what's funny is if you don't live in one of those states, so I live in Washington, and you go to a certain site, it'll say things like, you don't live in a state that gets to redact your information or download your information or delete it. And it's just sad because we're all in the same country, and yet I don't have those rights.
It's true. Well, okay. So I would say a lot. This is sort of just like a general policy trend that's been true for the past 10 to 15 years.
Hmm.
And it's like essentially for a while now, I would say for more than a decade, we've had what would have been traditionally like referred to as like a lame duck Congress,
Hmm.
right? Like we just can't pass legislation. Um, so a lot of legislation is being passed on the state level. So now we're getting like you look at like state legislation is drifting further and further apart from each other. And now if you like drive around the country, like the rights you have in each state varies greatly.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that in privacy law. So we've seen 5 or 6 states that have passed privacy law. There's like 3 more coming online next year. There is a federal committee to
Hmm.
try and pass comprehensive federal privacy law. And it's been out of draft, I think, or out of committee for a while, but nothing has actually been submitted to the floor. So we don't know necessarily the shape of what that bill or that law is going to look
Yeah.
like. Um, and it's entirely possible that it'll never get passed. So
Yeah, and or that if it gets passed, it's incomplete, or that it doesn't correctly address certain issues. Well, and what I think surprises me is that when I think of states as being tech states, I think of California as a tech state, but I also think of
mhm.
Washington as a tech state, and I feel like there should be more care or more done about this. But maybe we're one of the next, 5 states to be on the docket for that.
I think Washington has had something in draft. I don't know if it's been passed. I have like a interactive map that we look at every quarter to see
Yeah.
like where all the privacy laws at. Um, but the interesting thing that's happening in America is that because California was first,
Hmm.
and because they passed the CPPA, and then they revised that law with the CPRA.
Yeah.
And it seems to be relatively effective. Like most sites are participating in showing a banner and doing other important data privacy rights. And there are lots of data privacy rights besides the right to consent, by the way.
Hmm.
We can talk about that, but I don't know how boring that is.
Well,
um,
I wanted to follow up on just a couple of points here, and then shift into some other parts of what you mentioned in your intro.
oh yeah,
One of them is that you mentioned you got generous headcount that was then dwindling over time. Why do you think that is? That they're not assigning the same resources to this?
yeah. I think. Well, I think it's not just this. I think it's the whole company.
Yeah. Okay.
And more like the entire tech industry at large in a lot of ways. I had the kind of interesting situation where I went to two different companies when I joined during hypergrowth,
Hmm.
and then stayed until one or two or three rounds of layoffs.
Yeah.
So I think it's just like this natural expansion and contraction of companies, you know? Um, if you can survive like the second or third contraction, then you're probably going to expand again eventually.
Yeah.
Um, Pandora didn't really survive the second contraction. They got bought by a bigger company, and they're owned by Sirius now. So I think we're at like a really interesting point in like Twitch's trajectory, right? Where I joined in 2017. I saw this massive, or 2016. Yeah, end of 2016. I saw a massive expansion. So when I joined, it was like it was like 500 people ish, I think,
Yep.
500 to 700 people. And then I remember the day that we passed 1,000 people. And then, probably by the time the first round of layoffs happened, we were at like 3,000 people. And now I think we're down to about 1,000 people again. And I think that's just like, I don't know, there's like a cyclical nature to this sort of thing. And I'm not convinced, and I don't know how other people feel about this, but I'm not convinced that like hypergrowth helps. Like I think we're people look at the layoff problem from the
Hmm.
perspective of like we shouldn't lay off people. But I think like the problem might exist up like like earlier on in the pipeline. And I think it's just that like we get the I think a lot of companies get this like sudden influx of cash and they're like, okay, now we can afford to hire like the 300 people we've been wanting to hire forever. And then they do such rapid hiring and they're pulling from, and usually these massive hypergrowth expansions happen during times when the market's good,
Hmm.
right? So people have jobs already. So you're either poaching people who have jobs or, you're competing for a limited number of people who don't have jobs. And then you like probably end up with not the best talent, to be honest. So I
Yeah.
think
I, I,
it's a weird practice, and it's weird that people don't take like a long-term look and say like maybe hypergrowth is not is not a good way to like build a company.
Yeah, I,
But
I think there are a lot of intertwined problems there. And I think as far as people looking at trends or analyzing anything and then reflecting on it and coming up with a better solution, I think that that's expecting a lot of people. I guess the simplest thing is during the pandemic, we all had this hyper awareness of what it was to be sick around other people, and you'd wear a mask and you'd social distance. And now I feel like that same awareness should still be there, right? And people should know, oh, I shouldn't be coughing in public. I should cover my mouth. And yet it's vanished. I don't tend to see that as much anymore. So when I think it comes to analyzing economic trends or company hiring or what is the job security I have at picking job A over B, I think people are probably just like, yeah, plug their ears and hope for the best.
it is really weird that like running a company is not a solved problem.
Yeah.
I have this thought a lot. Like, there's what, like probably a million like how to manage people books out there, how to build a company, how to structure teams. And it's like, it's super interesting to me that like people have been managing and organizing other people since the dawn of man,
And
and,
yet I feel
and
like
it's not
now,
solved.
but now it's at a scale that I think was unprecedented. It's like you have companies that are making more than the GDP of countries. And how do you manage something like that when it's not, I don't know, typically anything of that level of wealth would have been a government doing this, which still is a management problem. But
Yeah.
yeah, this reminds me of
Working.
the quote, two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. You once you involve anyone else, you've already increased the number of problems you'll encounter tenfold. And then when you have 100,000 people at a company, and Amazon's at what, like 1 point something million across all of their roles that they have, because they count delivery drivers and everything too.
Amazon is okay. I'm gonna tell you a story.
Yeah.
So Amazon joining a company like Amazon was very strange for me because I came from YouTube and
Hmm.
then Pandora, which I think at its most had like 600, 800 people. Like it wasn't that big of a company. So it was easy to have like, a pretty loose, flexible culture. My very first Amazon offsite, I went to ProdCon, which is like where all the product managers across of Amazon can come together
Yep.
and like listen to talks and case studies and just meet each other and sort of network. And it was the first time that I had met like a lot of product managers from the rest of Amazon. So like Amazon retail was there, like all of AWS was there, and like it was just like a very big, diverse group of people. I even met like a warehouse, like a logistics product designer, which I
Mm.
thought was really cool. Um, and I was talking to all these people, and I kept hearing these like phrases
Yeah.
repeated that I was like, that's weird because like I had never heard someone say that before, and you're like the third or fourth person I've heard say that. And one of them was, the customer is divinely unhappy.
It,
That was like
the customer is what and happy?
divinely unhappy.
Divinely
Like,
unhappy. Okay, got you.
yeah. Another one was it's like learning to ride a bike before you learn to walk,
Mm.
which like you can kind of eke out what those things mean, but you're like, that's weird that that's the fourth person I've heard say that.
Yeah.
And then I was in a talk, and then someone had the words, the customer is divinely unhappy, and in quotes, and then it was attributed to Jeff Bezos. And I was like, oh my God, I think I've figured it out. And it turns out that like around the time that I went there, Jeff Bezos was writing these kind of intense, like almost manifesto-esque letters to the shareholders. And people were taking these letters to the shareholders and they were sharing it, and everyone was reading it and like making it a part of their ethos. And it was like the first time ever that I had ever seen a company culture sort of engage in something similar to like hero worship.
Mm.
And it was very weird. It was very interesting. It felt like I haven't read or seen this, but it kind of felt like The Circle, the like Dave Eggers book or
I
whatever.
haven't heard of that now.
But it is definitely like a strange, like you said earlier, companies have higher GDPs than some countries.
Yeah.
I think when you get to that size, like you need an ethos, like you need a constitution. Like you need something that drives people in generally the same direction. And the way that that information is disseminated among the many people at that company looks materially different than at smaller companies. Because smaller companies, you can say like, here are our 5 values. Let's look at these 5 values. But I don't think that's enough to like actually get into people's brains and to actually get them to think the way that leadership wants you to think. I think at these like really big companies, you need like a body of work. You need something resembling like a Bible essentially to
It's
disseminate
hard. It's
beliefs.
hard to say. So I think Amazon is a completely different scale than the other big tech companies, only based on the number of industries they're in and how much they've expanded. And they're still, I feel like, trying to sort of claw up everything. They've gotten into healthcare now, and they were already in retail and streaming. Okay, so at other big companies, I feel like if you have 100 or 200,000 employees, that's already massive. And you still run into these information dissemination problems that you're talking about. But there, I still feel like it boils down to here's our mission statement. And that's an
Yeah.
easily repeatable, like every word hand chosen in it to make sure that it makes sense. And that's how they get people on board. And it's less of the hero worship. Hey, we have an iconic figure. And maybe Apple would have been that way if Steve Jobs were still alive. And maybe, I don't know, Microsoft would be that way if Bill Gates were still as involved as he was. But maybe that's why Jeff Bezos started Amazon, and he was that
Yeah.
figurehead.
I mean, the reason why I bring it up is because there have been like several points in my time in Amazon where I'm like, this sounds a little bit more like a religion than like a corporate
Mm,
culture. And I think that's just kind of what happens when you get this big.
yeah.
Like it has to resemble something like if you look at this is gonna get spicy, but if you look at like how do you move entire peoples, like
Hmm.
how do you take a country and get them to all do one thing? It's like you indoctrinate them with religion.
Yeah.
So if you want to move a great number of peoples, in this case, all of Amazon, you kind of have to indoctrinate them into a religious like thing, which is sort of fascinating to me.
Yeah. And I feel if you put this in a more maybe innocuous sounding language, you'd say something like, this is what a company culture is. It is getting people to act as one when there are many different organizations and individuals involved. And to have an effective culture that does pervade to the point where you're hearing these quotes over and over, some of that I have to say I think sounds a little like selection bias. It's like maybe the kind of people who go to this convention and then the kind of people who are going to pay attention to what Jeff Bezos says. Maybe there's more overlap than in the rest of the company. I don't know for sure, but it is
Yeah.
remarkable that you heard that sort of thing. And I thought what you were going to say is that, oh, and I also heard two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead a bunch of times there. And I was like, I was not at this convention. I did not talk to these people. So, um, interesting. Going back, it sounds like yes, there was a need for privacy. It was married to your desire to also be in there. You have a sense of justice that you wanted to fulfill through that, and that led you along the path to where you are now. And this general contraction in the industry has led to more opportunity for you to do this. At what This is a personal question you certainly don't have to answer, but at what point do you think you want to say that's it? I'm done taking on new things. I'm done growing in my career. Where does the ambition end?
Um, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Uh, I think I'm going through a bit of a midlife crisis right now,
Yeah.
where I'm like, oh, what is my legacy? Like, I don't know what that looks like for me, and it's something that I think about a lot. And if you had talked to me 3 or 4 years ago, I would say like I wanted to become an executive, and I was
Mm,
pretty sure about it. And I had kind of, I guess, deluded myself a bit into what is like corporate second wave feminism. I don't know if you're like aware of like the different waves of feminism, but there was like this thing that had happened like prior to I think like 2016 where women were like, we can do it all. We can
mhm.
have it all. We can have like these great careers. We can be homemakers and great mothers and great wives and great everything, right? We can do all these things and all we have to do is work ourselves to death.
Yeah.
Um and work harder than everyone else. And I had convinced myself that the only way I could ever make things better for other women was to become a leader,
Hmm.
become an executive and make the culture and the environment better for other women and hire women and just like give them like a safe place where they can grow and thrive and do well. And I'd been in tech and gaming for my entire career, which has been sort of historically known as like the subsection of like the most toxic place for women
Yeah.
to succeed. Um, and I think that's a little flawed. Like one thing I noticed really early on, I have done a ton of charity and volunteer work for what I consider under like communities that are disproportionately affected by prejudice. Um, and when I was at Pandora, I did this volunteer thing called Futures,
Hmm.
which is we went into elementary schools in Oakland that didn't have music programs, and we would teach music class for them because
Hmm.
they just didn't have the funding to learn music, and we thought music was really important for Oakland, for the community at large. Um, and I met a set of people there that were all doing this, that were all tech musicians, like they're in music and they're in tech. And then I went to Twitch. And then at Twitch, I'm involved in two different groups. One's called the Hidden Genius Project, and the other one's called Black Girls Code. And we do these like regular recurring classes with these like young Black men from Oakland who are in essentially like tech boot camps while they're in high school. It sort of just sets them up for success and exposes them to tech and entrepreneurship. Um, and I remember going to my first meeting, and there were 3 people at this meeting that I knew from the Futures program. And I was like, that's so weird, because these are kind of totally unrelated things, I think.
Yeah.
But then as I've been doing more and more volunteer work and more, like I do Dress for Success and I do the Marcy Lad group, I keep seeing the same like 100 people over and over and over and over again. And it's like 1% of the people are doing 95% of the work to make tech better, I think. And that was really surprising to me. And I was like, why do we take on like this crazy disproportionate amount of work? And then I realized it's kind of like this interesting allusion to like how what it's like, I think, for a lot of successful women in the industry as well. Like I think we take on this disproportionate amount of work in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And it comes out in kind of weird ways. Like every single team I've been on, they expect me to like plan parties. Because right now I'm like one of 2 women, I think, in the entire org I'm in. And it's like whenever there's like an event, they're like, hey, who's going to plan the offsite? And I'm like, oh, why is everyone looking at me? But like I think at the time I had kind of deluded myself into thinking that the only way to make things better for people would be to become an executive.
Mm-hmm.
The longer I've been in tech, and more importantly, the longer I've been in the corporate world, I'm starting to believe that that is incorrect.
So I want you to expand on this. Uh, there are so many questions that I have. So I think let's continue this thread at least for now. So how did you feel that your thoughts have changed? How do you feel I pretty much want to ask, tell me more about the midlife crisis.
Oh, the midlife crisis is super interesting. How is it expressing itself? I haven't been streaming recently.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I did like a weird fearless inventory of what streaming got me.
Yeah.
Like emotionally and mentally, and like how it made me feel. And then that led to a sort of fearless inventory of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I don't think anyone sits around and they're like, I spend 100% of my time doing something.
Yeah.
Right? So like 20% is streaming, like 40% is work, like 10% is charity work, like 5% is like hiking or working out or whatever, and like you kind of just lift everything out. And then I did like this crazy matrix of like what I think these things give me or get or bring to my life, or if they enrich me. And then I had like a series of like 10 different factors. It's like, does this make me feel like good about myself? Does this increase my like does this make me feel like excited?
Yeah.
Does this help me sleep at night? Like just like a bunch of different things. I did the very fearless inventory of all the things I spent my time on. And it became extremely clear that streaming was actually pretty low. It had like a pretty low overall score. And I think this is something, and it actually, like looking at this really motivated me to want to make Twitch a better place. Because I think a lot of online spaces, and it's not just Twitch, it's like Twitter and like like Instagram, like there's lots of different social online spaces. If an online space like doesn't deserve your time, you shouldn't give your time to it.
Yeah.
I guess, if it makes sense. And I feel like a lot of online spaces recently don't deserve my time. Like I'm a finite resource, and I think I can help a lot of people, and I felt like I wasn't helping people through a lot of these surfaces. And like I looked back at my last like 100 tweets, and like I wrote some pretty interesting stuff about like what it's like to be resilient, and like how, you can take feedback well, or how you can assert yourself, that had like 1,000, 2,000 views. And then I had 2 tweets that went viral. One of them was just a MacBook Pro cord that had turned yellow. And I was like, why is this yellow?
That's profound. That's very profound.
And it had 3 million views. And I was like, what? And the other was a dick joke. And I was like, guys, like, this shouldn't be like a 2 million viewed tweet. Like, that's just like, I'm doing a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm saying a lot of interesting things. I'm trying to spread wisdom, and I'm trying to like elevate people and like take my experiences and turn it into things that other people can use. I'm not here to just make dick jokes,
Well, okay.
Um,
So I feel like there's a ton to dissect. So I'm sorry, but I have to stop you for a second.
mhm, mhm,
One is I feel in general that this has been happening with a 24-hour news cycle, that people started doing what they can for clicks and for attention. And that's essentially what every company is now vying for, is your attention, then your money,
mhm,
which comes from your attention
mhm,
being on a product.
mhm.
And you get attention through generally negative emotions, outrage and fear, and then humor, of course, and levity is a way of spreading it on social media to some extent. So I feel like almost it's a reflection of that effect, where it's like you can have these positive messages, but they reach a narrower audience, so then they get shared less. And it's a shame that, yes, a yellow MacBook cord is somehow at the top of the list. um, but I wanted to actually delve into another point that you mentioned here. So you took this fearless inventory, you determined that streaming wasn't meeting your needs, and yet when you set out to stream, you had goals in mind with it. And I'm now kind of cutting through some of this stuff to say, I know you were trying to learn coding, and I believe that was to, connect to engineers better, to learn what they're going through. You wanted to make it a platform for charity as well. You wanted to come up with every possible pun of your name and programming languages. And so I think those are your main three goals that you had. Um,
Wow, you really hit that nail on the head. Yeah, that is
so
exactly my three goals. Yeah.
those goals don't stop being your goals when streaming stops meeting your needs, right? Or have you determined that that was part of the inventory of learning coding, pursuing those projects is also not meeting your needs?
Yeah. So one of the big things I think that was true of one of the categories in like the fearless inventory or whatever was like, do I think I have enough energy for this thing?
Yeah.
And that's where streaming scored the lowest.
Mm.
And there's a lot of stuff like work right now is very crazy. I've gone from being in charge of privacy to being in charge of like four different product teams and therefore four different engineering teams essentially. Um and that's taking up a lot more of my attention and sapping a lot of more of my energy. And then the other thing that I'm really into now is weightlifting,
Hmm.
which takes, 6 or 7 hours a week, depending on how committed I am that week. Um, and if I look at like, I have energy to do a finite number of things, streaming just took such a bizarre amount of energy
Yeah.
out of me. Like, you're sitting there talking to people for 4 hours and it feels like you've worked a full day somehow. Um, and then that was on top of my other job. So I think there is a world in which, like, I suddenly have more energy, and that could be due to a lot of things that, like, I have some or no control over. Like maybe things on my job calm down, or maybe I start a new role somewhere, or maybe I take time off where I do return to streaming. And I am planning after the summer to like do like once a week streaming just to so I don't lose all my coding ability.
Well,
But yeah.
isn't that part of the inventory though? I feel like, okay, if you're managing four teams, and we still haven't gotten to the point where you said that 3 to 4 years ago you would have wanted to be an exec, but then that do it all mentality needed to break down somewhere. Getting back to once a week streaming, what purpose does that serve for you?
Um, well, I like my community.
Yeah.
Like I genuinely like them and I like hanging out with them. And in that way, like it's a good use of my time. It's a
Yeah.
good use of my energy. I like, generating money for charity and stuff too. That's been a really cool part that like bonds the community together. Um, sorry, I lost the thread. What was the original
No,
question?
so I asked it in a more pointed way than I wanted to, but also you had said that you wanted to keep up your coding skills. What I meant to ask was, what would your coding skills help you with if you're as so busy at work, and you've learned what you've learned already, and that you don't necessarily see that dying down anytime soon?
Yeah, that's a part of the midlife crisis. Someone in my channel joined my channel and I was learning Elixir. And they said something that was kind of like being trolly, but then it sort of threw me for a loop because it was a good point. And they said, "I don't like your content because you don't build anything, you just learn things." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's true." Oh, but yeah, I guess that's true. So I thought about that, and it's true. I hadn't built something for a couple years. I had been doing a lot of learning, a lot of puzzle solving, and I love puzzles. I'm like, I get real freaky with it. Like you can put me in front of like a jigsaw puzzle and I won't move for hours. But I like also solving programmatic puzzles. And like one of the things I think initially drew me to programming is that like um coding lets like unlocks like this whole set of puzzles
Yeah.
that you can't like your brain's not good enough to do by itself
Yeah.
unless you're, Matt Damon from Good Will Hunting.
Hmm.
Um and it and when you get to solve like these really complex puzzles, using your brain essentially, but then, having a computer as a proxy, you get to feel like a genius without really being a genius. And I really liked that aspect of it. But I hadn't built anything for a while. And when I first started streaming, I was building cool stuff. Like I was building extensions, and I was building chatbots, and I was building like fun little like standalone web apps. And I just kind of had drifted so far away from that. And I had no idea why. It was really unclear. So I think when I decided to take a break from streaming, one of the like promises I made to myself is when I go back to streaming, it'll be because I want to build something
Hmm.
and not just because I want to make content. So when I come back to streaming, I'm gonna definitely try and like build something specific.
I think that's good. I think the one part that it's just unfortunate, I guess, is that you know what it's like as a streamer. There are strange incentives a lot of the time. There's a focus on view count. There's a focus on how many followers or subscribers you got. You start equating, was this a good stream with, are the metrics good enough, and not, do you feel good at the end of it? And like you said, that 4 hour input time can feel like you put in something like an entire day. And then one viewer says something like, hey, you're not building stuff, and it can rattle you. And and
Yeah.
and yet it seems like that person's voice has been amplified to the point where it is almost, it's playing into that inventory you took, such that it's practically dictating the next few months, to the point where when you feel like you have something to build, you'll come back. And I think it's a shame to some extent, only because I feel like your desires should hopefully come from you. And it's just, it's sad that someone in the community says something like that, and then it has such an impact.
Yeah. I mean, I probably have a bit of a spicy take on this. Which is like, yeah, people say shitty things. But like no one gets to make you feel shitty other than yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, so it's like I can sit here and be like, oh, this guy didn't like my content and I feel bad about it, but I'm like, who the fuck's that guy? Who cares?
Yeah. Also, I
Like,
feel the need to remind you, I was trying to keep this content family friendly. So
oh, I'm so sorry.
that's totally fine. I
Okay,
just
I'll
want to
start
make
saying
sure we didn't
pork.
go too
Okay.
much farther off the rails than we already have.
Um,
I agree with what you're saying. It's the whole, you determine if you are offended by something, essentially. But I feel like that works as an ideal statement. But I think in practicality, it's like, hey, someone said you're a jerk face and you feel bad about it because you recognize their intent to hurt, and you
yeah.
don't necessarily care about the words. I actually want to take a 90-degree turn here and go back
Okay.
to something from earlier. You had mentioned before this that you wanted to help women in tech and help underrepresented communities. And you've talked a little bit about this, but I want to tie this back to what you said about the 3 to 4 years ago when you wanted to do it all and you wanted to help women and you thought that being an exec could be that route. What do you feel that route is now for helping women in underrepresented communities, especially in tech?
Yeah. I think my route, at least my goal, is I want to essentially start my own nonprofit
Mm,
and be like very nose to the grindstone involved in helping people. Um, I have a plan. It's like a 3 to 5 year plan.
yeah.
I think it was 5 years when I started it, and it's been 2 years. Um, but yeah, I think people have been approaching this problem wrong in a
Hmm.
lot of ways, and I think I have some ideas on how to approach it right.
Can you give us like the elevator pitch of what the incorrect and correct approaches are?
Well, yeah, I can talk about what I think is wrong a little bit. So if you look at the majority of like how people from non-traditional backgrounds get into tech,
Hmm.
it's very weird to me that the trajectory is to be non-traditional. like, like it's really interesting to me that people are like, oh, this person didn't get to go to a 4 year college. Let's
Mm,
stick them in a boot camp, right?
yeah.
And then we do nothing to really stimulate or simulate what a 4 year college degree would look like for someone in that situation.
Yeah.
I also think we weirdly over-index on front end. Like I think we have too many front end developers in the industry, and then for some reason that's like the primary skill that we teach to people through boot camps or through these programs. When I think like it's actually like much more career viable to be like a very robust, well-rounded full stack developer or a backend engineer.
Hmm.
Um, and I personally think that there's a very strange focus on that, and I haven't quite figured out why.
So
I think, yeah.
I was gonna say, my personal take is I feel like somewhere someone decided this is easier to get people motivated, because one thing about front end that is almost certainly, agreed on by most people is like your changes are seen almost immediately and in a
Reactive,
visual
yeah.
way. And yeah, and maybe that was easier to get people on board and they maybe tried some other things.
Yeah, but like that's assuming like everyone's the same type of learner,
Y-
you know?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and
it,
so,
it has a
oh,
lot of weird assumptions. And then it's kind of made things shitty for front-end developers, I think, too. Because there's this weird equation of like, oh, if you're a junior, you're front end, which is like deeply untrue. Like I've met a lot of front-end developers that are brilliant and amazing at what they do. And I think it's just like a lot of people are approaching the problem, but they're not approaching it very well.
yeah.
And I also think uh they're not targeting the right people in
Hmm.
a lot of ways. So I would kind of like to take a shot at it, I guess.
And,
Like I've
and
been involved in a lot of these groups already, and I want to take my own shot at it.
yeah, I was going to say, you said 3 to 5 year plan, but that you've been working on it for 2 years already, right? So
Yes.
that was your elevator pitch for what's wrong. What's your elevator pitch for your plan on kind of tackling this and addressing some of the problems?
I would love to I would love to try, but it's so unformed in my brain. I
Okay.
think
Okay.
I'll mess it up.
Yeah.
So the answer is ask me in a year.
Okay. All right. I'll write that down. Ask in a year. Done.
Oh god.
um, okay. I've got some other couple of things that I want to make sure we get to because we're running a little bit out of time. For
Mhm.
one, kudos to you for guessing some of the questions I had, because I did have some questions about industry trends, including Twitch laid off a bunch of employees at the beginning of this year, and you sort of naturally touched on that, and you naturally touched on some of these other things. Uh, I wanted to give you a little bit of a platform to talk about the charities you're working with now, if you'd like
Mm.
to, and tell more about what they do, what their mission is, how we could get involved.
Yeah, so the big two groups that I've been involved with recently is the Hidden Genius Project,
Hmm.
and I guess I can link it in chat. But they are essentially like ongoing tech education for high school age students and college age students. Um, and specifically, they're selecting in neighborhoods where they think like tech and entrepreneurship coming back to those communities could help that neighborhood
Hmm.
essentially like grow and thrive. And I've been working with them for heckin' 7 years now.
Yeah.
Um, they're amazing. They're also big. They're being supported right now by Kendrick Lamar, which is like the coolest thing ever. Because I ran into the entire group at a Kendrick concert, and I was like, "What are you doing here?" And they're like, "We're backstage," and I was like, "Yeah."
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but I can link them in chat.
Yeah.
Um, and the other group I work with is called the Marcy Lab group, and they're also they're actually they try and simulate like a 4-year degree.
Hmm.
So it's not just like a here's a 12-week boot camp, go find a job. It's like they're trying to create an alternative tech focus, like preparing you for a job in software education for marginalized groups. And I really like both of these groups a lot. So
So
I will.
if someone wants to get involved by spending time, how would they go about doing this as opposed to spending money?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you're in tech, they're and like say if you're a software developer,
Hmm.
like both of these groups, they do educational guest speakers. So I've been a guest speaker at both of these places, where you can talk about your experience, or you can do like specifically designed classes for the students. Like you can say like here's how to like ace the behavioral interview, and then you can like
Mm.
design a class for them. You can do they do all of the students that are in the Hidden Genius program and the Marcella group have to apply,
Hmm.
and they need help interviewing the students to see like if they qualify essentially um, for admission, and then you can volunteer to be an interviewer and give feedback there. Um, you can also volunteer to do like resume reviews. Like so when the kids graduate from the program, they'll usually have like a resume or mock interviews to prepare them to go find a job. You can run mock interviews or resume reviews for them
I
as
see.
well.
Yeah. And so you've been working with the Hidden Genius Project for the last 7 years, which is now long enough to have seen a career trajectory form from some of these people in the communities, like you said, that need more entrepreneurial minded people. Have you followed up with any individuals? Have you kind of seen their growth?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, the Hidden Genius Project is great. They have like I think a monthly newsletter where
Hmm.
they have like a whole section where they update on alumni and like they're like, oh, like this kid that you worked with 4 years ago, they just got an internship at Microsoft, and you're
Oh,
like, oh, that's
cool.
cool. So it's
Yeah.
like there's a pretty good closed feedback loop once you start working with these programs, and I think that's like a really important part of feeling like you're doing something meaningful. Like that also applies to product, but we can talk about that some other time. Like I think being able to tell someone they did a good job is like really important.
Yeah. I This is a consistent theme that I see. I'm doing mentoring on stream, and validation plays such a huge role. And I think what makes people pursue things. And if you're patted on the back as a kid for doing anything, playing a sport, doing something academically, you're more likely to do that thing. I feel it's a simple like. So anyway, I like that they do a newsletter. I like that you can follow up on that. Um, I have a question, and everything up until now has been opinion oriented, and you can answer however you want. But this one has a right answer.
Okay.
What is your favorite video game character?
Character.
Yes,
Dang.
dang,
I
indeed.
don't That's a hard one. Um have you ever played Kingdom Hearts?
I haven't. I'm familiar with Sora and most of the Disney characters.
um there was kind of like less well-known prequel called Birth by Sleep.
Hmm.
And it's just like a story about like three friends just trying to like make sure that they all make it.
Yeah.
And it's actually like this really weird, sweet story. And one of the characters from that is a girl named Tara, and I think she's like extremely strong and powerful, and she does her best to like choose the right decisions and help her friends, and it's probably her.
Okay.
So.
I mean, that's a good answer. But like I said, there was a right answer, and it's any character from Skeleseller. So,
Oh my god, I'm so sorry. The
yep.
main character from Skeleseller, who I
Unfortunately,
totally
yeah,
know.
I'm gonna have to
It's like a
dock you.
top down. I don't think there's a main character, is
Talk
there?
to you for that one. Look, I really appreciate the time. I really enjoy these conversations and just finding out about people. Unfortunately, I kind of cut us too close to the time where we don't have time for questions from chat. But yeah, I think this is great. So thank you for coming on the show and
I
for
didn't get
sharing.
to pitch my reality shows to
Oh
you.
yeah, okay.
Do you
Why
have
don't you do
time?
that? Yeah. We
Okay.
got some time.
Okay. So the first one is like hot ones.
Hmm.
But instead of the interviewee eating spicier and spicier wings, they're getting a full body wax.
Get some full body wax. Where do you
Yeah.
start? Top or bottom?
I think you start with like arms
Arms,
and
okay.
then you move to like chest
I
and
feel
then
like it should
legs.
end with waxing your head. Okay.
The other idea is kind of like hot ones too, in that you're interviewing like celebrities, but they have to complete increasingly complex parallel parking challenges. So they have to like parallel park like a hybrid car, and then
Hmm.
like an SUV, and then like a semi truck, and then a boat.
So who pays for the insurance for this show? Because
Netflix does.
Netflix does. Okay.
This is my Netflix pitch. And
Okay.
then my last one, which is probably the most wholesome, is called Bark Chiller. And it's where you take someone who's looking for a dog,
Hmm.
and then you introduce them to 10 dogs,
Hmm.
and they go on like doggy dates with the dogs, and they slowly eliminate over the course of time which dog ends up being their dog.
Okay. Well, you said I have to be a contestant on these. So if I were being a contestant, I'd pick show number 2 about parallel parking. But from
Really? Over Bark Chiller?
I am not a dog person, but I was gonna say, as far as a show with longevity and promise, I feel like yeah, Bark Chiller would be the best one. I've never thought of that concept. Reality show matching humans and dogs. Um, yeah, I don't have any pitches for you, unfortunately. I'll have to come up with some shows and then tell you about them. But yeah, thank you. Like I said, I really appreciate it. This is, interview
Yeah.
number 3. Any closing thing you want to plug, a link you want to share?
Yeah, I'll post the Hidden Genius project in chat right now.
Okay.
They're a really great group. I've been working with them for a long time, and they're awesome, as well as the Marcy Lab group.
Yeah, and check that out. Like she said, it's 100 people doing 95% of the work. So let's make it 103 people by the end of this.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, well, I hope you have a good rest of
Um.
your. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah. Can you play Jump Royale
Can I play Jump Royale right now?
after we get off the
Oh
call?
yeah, sure. Yeah, and that way you can show everybody your jump skills. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you again. I hope you have a good rest of your Friday, and nice talking to you,
Yeah.
Mel.
Thanks, Adam. Bye.
Bye.